2 weeks to go in your SuperCoach season. How do you feel about that? Are you stoked? Are you disappointed? Generally, based on how your rank or your league results feel like they're going, probably determine your level of joy or disappointment about what's coming through the remaining now 2 weeks of SuperCoach. We are going to talk about the outs to some big relevant players and how you should be negating it. We will open up the 2025 Black Book. And of course, we should give you a little bit of talk around captaincy options and players you can look at. Before we get into any of that, joining me back on the podcast, a regular part of the coaches panel. And for those watching on YouTube, a little bit of a different background, the recently moved house MiniMonk. Hello, mate. Nice new digs. Congratulations to you and Miss O on the new place. And wow, a final interesting 2 weeks of SuperCoach in the mix for us, isn't it?
It is. For those who are unaware, which is probably most people, I've been absent a little bit over the last few weeks, primarily because of this move. It's been keeping me busy, but it's nice to finally be in and relatively settled and keen to attack the last couple of weeks as SuperCoach with whatever trades we all might have left, which for me is absolutely none.
I think you've been sitting on the donut of trades for 4 to 6 weeks, which is not uncommon for coaches. And this is where those that have stockpiled 1, 2 or more really are hoping to gain back some points they may have lost over the past few weeks. Coaches have caught donuts over the last week or two, potentially, with late outs to a Mateus Philippou. And now this week, we have a plethora of relevant names. We should probably start there with the outs. If you don't have a trade, you are just swinging in the wind and hoping that at least you can get 22 on field. But for those of us with a trade, we've got a couple of names that we need to look at. Most highly owned is a Harry Sheezel. You probably then look at a Tim English in the mix of that. And oddly enough, the ownership percentage across the format would say Charlie Curnow is really heavily owned up there. And then you've got a spattering MiniMonk of some other guys. Warner's out. Mackay is also out, as well as a bunch of others that we could throw into the mix. And still no Philippou back into our sides, no Schoenmaker, no Dowling. So any hope of some cavalry coming for some of those outs is going to hurt us as well. So let's help coaches make the decision, maybe not specifically on who they should be trading into, although we'll get there. For coaches that have a trade and have one or more of those injuries, all could miss, by the way, the rest of the season. I've got no confidence that Curnow, English, Sheezel are one and done weeks. They all sound like next week could be a variable that's up in the air. So that said, how do you determine priority levels of which of the players you should be moving on, MiniMonk?
It's all about where you've got cover at this stage of the year.
Yeah.
I doubt many coaches have an R2, R3 swing unless you've got a Jackson, which is probably not the best, but it's at least something. Defensively, some people might have an Evans, some people might have a Humphreys. Forward, some people might have a Fisher who's come back, or they might have a Manor. It's probably just about that. At this stage of the year, it's about trying to avoid the donut, trying to swing as much DPP as you can, which you hope you have from the donut playing 102k guys that you brought in, that you can just facilitate that as much as you can, and then targeting the best available player in order to maximize the points that you can get from the player that you're trading out and the cover that you bring on.
So let's talk about Tim English, because that's probably the one coaches don't have coverage for. Again, if you don't have a trade, man, unless you've got the Luke Jackson loopage, you're staring down the barrel of a donut, unfortunately. Yep. But if you've got the trade, that's the line you're least likely to have coverage. He's not got as much value financially on top of him as he may have had at various points through the season. So to get up to the one of Marshall or Cherry, who are the most informed rucks at the moment. That's no disrespect on Gawn, by the way, but just those two boys are absolutely flying at the moment. If you've got the cash, do you have a preference of Marshall over Cherry at the moment in SuperCoach?
Oh, that's a tough one. They both have just amazing matchups this week. Marshall's got Geelong and Cherry's got a ruckless Western Bulldogs. There's no Tim English this week. And then the week afterwards, Cherry's going up against Hawthorn, which has been one of the friendlier matchups in recent times. And Marshall is coming up against Carlton. No Tom De Koning, working against Pittman. And potentially no Curnow, maybe no Mackay. They're short on tall stocks. It's really
could
hard
get
to
brutal.
do. I would lean towards Cherry if you've got the cash to get there. But if you have to settle for Marshall, I mean, you're still pretty happy with that. It might be a 5-10 points between them over the 2 weeks. If you need that little bit of, if you can do it in one trade and you can get English to Marshall in one trade and you have 2 trades left over, I'd much rather do that than burn through both trades.
Yeah, I agree. And Max Gawn's an interesting one. He's been so good for us for the first 2/3 of the season. He was one of those players that we talk about in SuperCoach in your starting squad and early trades. There are a handful of players that can take a season away from you. Cherry was one of those in terms of value versus now output. Gawn was that in terms of, yes, offering us value, but was a captaincy option basically every single week over the first 3 months of the season, despite having one of the early season buys, which I know feels a lifetime ago now. If you can afford Gawn, knowing their season is cooked and they're still happy to roll him out, would he be someone, if that's all you can settle for with trade? Again, most coaches, they're doing a one trade hit here rather than, I've got a little bit of extra cash to splash. Are you happy to settle for Gawn if that's all you can go? And then we'll look at the others, but is that a happy spot for you?
Look, honestly, I'm not sure I am.
Yeah.
There's a lot of just uncertainty around him and in Melbourne in general. I mean, we've all seen the media reports this week. We've seen the report about Petrarca, about Oliver being iced for the rest of the season. Alex Neil-Bullen wants out as well. Even Houston, who was apparently going to be going there, is having second thoughts about whether he wants to go to Melbourne.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a concerning time to be trading into a Melbourne player, let alone the fact that Max Gawn's been recovering off of an injury, and there's every chance they might just give him a rest in the last round and make sure that he's just cherry ripe and give him a good preseason.
Yeah.
That's
the risk. Yeah, I don't know if I could advocate for trading into Gawn as though he's the best, easier parallel trade option of English to jettison over. I'd almost be rather looking to the others, but the others offer interesting. Like Toby Nankervis has been great, but the fixture matchups isn't friendly. Then you're heading to a Riley O'Brien, who the fixture's pretty decent, but Sweet's not been as easy to score against as late, who they come up against this week. And then Grundy, he feels like he's slowed considerably as the season's gone on as an opponent, but definitely wouldn't be someone I'd want to trade into. Yes, we know Jared Witts can really put some big scores on, but against a Max Gawn this week, I don't want any piece of that. Is there any ruckman? I've deliberately left a name there to see if you'll pick it up, but if you don't have any money to throw on top of English, is there at least a option, if not two, that coaches could consider to trade into?
If you've got $200 lying in the bank, you could go to Kieran Briggs.
Yeah.
And that's a very enticing one. He's coming up against Fremantle, who are debuting Liam Reedy. He's 204 centimetres, 24 years old. He's been buying his time in the waffle behind Darcy and Jackson. He's no slouch, but it's obviously not like coming up against Sean Darcy. And then round 24, he comes up against the Western Bulldogs. And they think English will be back next week. But if he's not, could be another 110 type matchup for him. Here's one I'd be fairly interested in. If you're looking to try and make a little bit of cash, it's a bit harder to find an option that's enticing enough. And I think that's the really hard part. Yes, Grundy is a little bit cheaper, but I'm not sure I could advocate going there.
Meek, would you be interested in?
Yeah.
Richmond this week?
Meek's more expensive.
I know. That's what I mean. Like, it's not pretty, is it? Like
No.
Geelong, you're not looking at Reece Stanley. Darcy Cameron, I know, has put up some good scores. You're not going sweet. It really does feel, if you've got a bit of cash, get up to the one of Marshall or Cherry. If you've got to settle, geez, Gawn feels risky, but is the best scoring output. But Briggs, to me, feels the caution to the wind sort of pick that he's got some 120 plus scores this year, let alone what we know he's done previously. So, geez, that's probably where I'd sit. So if you've got no coverage and you've got one trade, don't waste it on Harry Sheezel. Get rid of the donut and cop the 50 or 60 that an Evans or a Humphreys type might throw your way. If you don't have English and you've got Harry Sheezel, I know tentative parts of us would go, or I might just wait and see what Evans does on a Saturday night or what Humphreys does on a Saturday night, and then I'll make the decision about what I do Sunday morning with Sheezel. And in principle, that's okay. But then you do narrow the field of trade options down to the likes of, are you going to go McKercher? Are you going to go Rioli? Are you going to go Sicily? Are you going to go Newman? Are you going to go into Yo? That's where it does get interesting. McGovern, is a really good shout as well.
McGovern is a great shout, I think, with no Mackay and no Curnow. I think that he could have an absolute field day.
It does smell 150 potentials, yeah.
Yeah, if I'm going to go towards a Sunday option and have a look at Evans on the Saturday night before committing to trading him out, McGovern is 100% the player I'd be going to.
What's your cutoff threshold? Using an Evans and Humphreys, again, those would be the popular bench options. What's your threshold? Again, Clarko was very clear that he wasn't playing this week in the presser, but did not give me any confidence as a Sheezel owner that I'm not walking into another week of holding him. So is it the scoring benchmark of an Evans or Humphreys that determines the trade? Or are you pretty keen to look to move on almost regardless of what happens this week, knowing this penultimate week could really define ranking success or whether you make your league grand final or not?
I think it all comes down to that. Like, what's your aim? If it's rankings, then potentially an 80 plus might do. If it's your league matchup, you can see how it looks on the Saturday night after the games. It looks like you're going to get the win by taking the points, and you'd probably try and hold. If you need to throw the Hail Mary, then you pull the trade. How many trades you got left? If you've got 2 trades left, I'd be much more willing to trade him. If I've only got the 1 trade left, I'd be more willing to hold for the week. And if you've got an 80 cover, but somewhere in that 80 markers is where I feel is about right. 75, 80. If you get something like that out of a rookie and they're covering your D6, like 2 years ago, if we had a D6 that goes 80 and around, you go, whatever, I'll take it. If you get a rookie that goes 80 in round 23 out of a 24 long season, you're pretty happy.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't, unless you've got more than 2 trades, you're waiting till Sunday morning to make that trade. And you're seeing what a Humphreys, like that matchup against St Kilda, while it's not as favourable defenders against St Kilda as it has been over the totality of the season, it's still a decent matchup for a player like Humphreys. And Evans against the Crows, like he's given us tons before in SuperCoach this year. So
it's a showdown as
you're
well.
not doing it before. Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah, well, exactly. So to me, I'm not trading Sheezel out unless you've got 3 or more trades until Sunday. If you've got 3 or more, well, now you want to have a look at all the available options for you that are playing through Saturday through there. But even then, those Sunday names are fine. McGovern, Rioli, Newman, McKercher.
There's enough there.
Sicily, again, is another who can do stuff.
And you might have DPP as well. Like, let's say you've got a Dacos or a Martin or a Young in your midfield this week, and you can look back and have a look at a midfield loop even and trade into a midfielder. Like some of the midfielders coming into this week as well.
Oh, yeah.
In that last day, Western Bulldogs, Trelaw, you could have a look at LDU, Hawks versus Richmond. You could consider a real day.
If you want to go smoky, Taranto is tricky. But
Sam Walsh as well.
Yeah, it's a good shout. I don't mind that one. Duggan, if you want to really blow your team up. But no, let's not do that one to us. So I think you're right. We've got options. I do want to open up the Black Book in a second. This is certainly not going to be the longest Coaches Panel podcast because, again, if you're deeply battling for rankings, you're limited with moves in SuperCoach right now. And if you're just like, I like hearing SuperCoach content, but I don't care about you don't need to hear an hour of the hair and the misso sorting you through how we're going to resolve things. But before we get to the Black Book, and we'll reveal one name that we've got each that's in our SuperCoach Black Book for 2025. VC and C options are probably what most coaches have as scoring variable movements that we can do. Give us some early round VC players we could look at. So sort of Saturday afternoon into Friday night, knowing then Saturday night into Sunday. We do have some pretty good captaincy options too, if our VC falls away. I feel like there's one that you're ready to run through the gates of hell with as a VC option though.
Oh, I think that this is the most obvious VC option of the round. And I think that I would assume that almost all coaches will have it. It's Sam Flanders.
Yeah.
Melbourne now, with no Petrarca and no Oliver, he's going to run absolutely right. Unless a tag goes to him, he's going to go off the chain.
And surely you're tagging an Anderson over a Flanders, if anything.
100%.
Yeah.
So yeah. He's the one that I'd be going to. You could have a look at someone like a Zorko as well against the Flyers.
Don't mind that
shout. If you're running a bit of a later one, because let's face it, most people have a few red dots, so you can probably look to loop quite late onto the round. On the Saturday night, St Kilda versus Geelong could be an absolutely SuperCoach gold one.
Oh.
You've got Tom Stewart, Jack Sinclair, Zaya Wanganeen-Milera, and Rowan Marshall as all potential VC and even captaincy options as well.
Yeah, that's true. Gee whiz.
And then the biggest one of all is on the Sunday morning. Sunday first game. Man, if you've got Tristan Cherry, he's your captain this week. Like, just, my God.
It could be
the most
brutal.
informed player. The most informed player in the game. And he's got a ruckless Western Bulldogs this week. At Marvel Stadium, under the roof.
You are normally getting a 130 and not even thinking. Yeah. But if you've got Cherry and you're behind, either in rankings where you feel like you are in the pack again, you can't see what others in contention are doing as easily as you can in other formats, such as AFL Fantasy, where they make that option. But in your ranking battle, where you get a sentiment of what the top 1% are doing with selections, and then if you're focused on leagues and you can see a little bit more clearly, you're like, man, I feel like I'm 20, 30 points behind off the marker. Geez, I've got Sheezel. Evans only got 80, and a lot of people have Humphreys, and he gets a 95. Geez, you're going to find it hard not to be like, you know what? I'm going to throw caution to the wind for potentially a 30-point loss for a 40 to 50-point gain, because he was on track for a 200 last week. And my goodness me, if the game's in tight and he's as dominant as he has been, it could be on.
And with a slow start as well.
That's true. Like that first quarter was really slow.
Weeks that he has had not the fastest starts out of the gate. And even still, he's managed to go 151, 144, 185. Like, that is ridiculous numbers.
It really
Especially for a ruckman who is playing essentially his first season being a sole ruckman.
That's true. It is wild when you think about it. He's the MVP in SuperCoach this season. Just, again,
across
you take
formats.
100%. You take what we paid for, the fact that he's only had the one bye and navigated us through beautifully. Now these monster ceiling games in this back half of the season. So much of the conversation heading into 2025 is going to be, is he worth starting? And that will be something we are not even going to worry about entertaining right now in the middle of August. These are January and February conversations to argue amongst ourselves and our listeners with. But he could not have done any more. Nobody has outperformed his scoring. Nobody is going as good as him right now. And nobody that you started with your team at the value he was is now in your team now, doing what that is. So it's hands down SuperCoach, AFL Fantasy, Dream Team, Bolter, whatever you want to call it. He's the best option we've had through there, that's for sure. So let's open up the Black Book for 2025 before we wrap up this episode then. So the premise is one player in your SuperCoach black book that you just want to put on the radar for the SuperCoach community? It might be an obvious pick, or it might be a really, really obscure one. Who's your black booker and why?
I have two.
Of course you do.
One's an obvious one, and one's a very obscure one.
Well, let's go with the obvious one.
The obvious one is Toby Conway.
Nice.
He has played as the main ruckman for Geelong for a few games this year. Not as often as what many would have thought. And their ruck stocks are just, Blicavs and Stanley aren't going to cut it for much longer.
Nope.
I think they wanted to play him more often from what I've heard. And he's in the right age to be able to break out. And we're going to be screaming out for a value ruck option next year. Mm-hmm. He looks like the most obvious one. I'd be having a look at him at an R2.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Who's your obscure one? Because some would say that's not obvious. But we've got him, and that's why we do this black book at the end of the year, not just for filler content to make a podcast go over 20 minutes, which we've officially crossed over, by the way, so don't worry about that. But it's genuinely because we do think differently in the preseason. We buy into the hype of what we see in social media. We forget these elements and then react chaotically in March, like, oh, Conway's playing ruck. We thought it was De Koning that was going to be their guy, and maybe that's the case. But again, that's the purpose of the black book. Put a guy in, process it, monitor the preseason with intrigue and interest. So I like that shout. Who's your obscure one then?
Neil Erasmus.
Woo! Talk me through it.
He currently has forward status. I suspect he'll probably keep it. And if he moves clubs, like what I'm hearing he probably will, he is going to be dirt cheap forward status, probably move somewhere where he's going to get inside midfield time.
Mm-hmm.
I have a feeling we could be running 3 rookie deep forward lines come next year. Him at F4 and a couple of 2024-25 draft pickups at F5 and F6. He's one that I would very much be penciling away if he moves clubs. And that's the caveat on it. He will not get the time if he stays at Fremantle. But if he ends up where I'm hearing he's likely to, it's on.
The forward line's fascinating to me because so much of this preseason was about, oh no, the forwards are bad, and we panicked. And politely as a community, Zorko popped more than he would have because of Coleman's injury. Let's be clear on that. But he was always a good shout because of how consistent he was. Heaney was the most obvious pick. Even if you'd not been on him, by the time round 0 was done, if you went against him, you're digging your own grave a little bit through there. But the forward line's heading into 2025. I've got no fear about what that line looks like for me, because we're going to have a Bailey Smith, yes, coming off an ACL, but he did the injury early in the preseason. So we know he's going to get bulk preseason. We know he's going to retain positional status because he hasn't had a chance to lose it. You throw a Mateus Philippou, who's going to really pop for coaches through there very easily. Isaac Rankin's going to sit in there, and he's been fantastic for us. Arguably, he should be better for us there. You mentioned Erasmus, let alone those other rookies you're alluding to. Like, we don't have to go too deep, too hard to fill out 8 forwards, do we?
No, and you run down the list of the highest priced forwards at this stage of the year. I know that there's been a bit of slip because of form and all that, but
sure.
Flanners, Zorko,
they'll
Caldwell, Heaney, they all lose it.
Yeah.
But you keep Rankin.
Mm-hmm.
Hogan is now the 4th highest priced forward. Keys probably keeps forward status.
Yep, I agree.
Moore will keep forward status. Rayner is probably 50-50 too. I think he's more likely to.
Mm-hmm.
Brent Daniels keeps it. Tracy keeps it. Draper might keep it if you're interested with Goldie retiring.
Yeah.
If Goldie does end up retiring at the end of this year, he could be a sneaky shout. Bailey Smith's still there, obviously on price. Jackson probably keeps forward status as well, especially now that Reedy's going to play this week.
Yeah.
There's going to be enough options there to be able to pick, at least 8 forwards to start your
comfortably.
Once you've got all the rookies and mid prices in, let alone to be able to get to a 6 premium forward line. It's going to be like this year where there's probably 3 or 4 that you're very comfortable fielding week in, week out, and a couple that make up the numbers. We talked the like of Dylan Moore has been one that people have been happy to run. People went to a Mackay, to a Kerno, to a Jackson. You get the staples and you try and fill in the rest.
Yeah.
And it'll be fine. Like you make it up in the other lines.
Yeah, I think that you're really just trying to go a base hit, really, to use a baseball analogy. Get on first with your forward lines next year, and you can be a lot more creative in your 3 other lines. So let alone if Luke Parker, as a name, hits over the line and pops it, let alone some club-changing options that always come our way. And there's always 1 or 2 that Champion Data gift us that you go, oh, I don't know if we deserved that one, but we'll take it. And then you've got Caleb Daniel, Jackson McRae. Like the list goes on and on of if these guys move clubs, okay, like the consideration comes. So I think the forward lines is nowhere near as chaotic that we should be concerned about.
No.
I'm going to give one.
Everyone's in the same boat as well. And
exactly.
I think we've all figured that out this year. It's like, it might feel awful, but if it all feels awful and everyone's on the same footing, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. It's either awful or really awful, and it's really awful because you miss 1 or 2 obvious ones, like the Heaney types of this year. So, yeah, I'm with you. For me, it does feel odd to mention his name in a positive light, but I'd find it really, really hard to ignore Clayton Oliver next year. Regardless of where he's playing next year, he does seem to me as the type of person that is very proud about who he is as an AFL footballer. And even the fact that during this week it was, why is he missing the rest of the year? Well, he's got some broken ribs. He's had a PCL injury. And we actually need to do some surgery on his hand that's unrelated to the finger injury that he had. So you put that all together. So 4 unique injuries off the back of no preseason. He's 40 points per game cheaper than what he did the previous 4 years of just a walk-up 120. So whether or not he stays or leaves Melbourne, to me, the fact is you've got a guy who's going to be priced at 84, who's got a half a decade of 110 plus scoring about him, 120, pushing 130 at some points. You can't tell me if he just goes through the preseason that you're just like, no, I don't want my share of Clary. Let's be honest. You'll watch him in that first community series game. If he tears it apart, you'll be like, why am I going against this guy? So to me, it feels obvious, but the noise around Clayton is so anti at the moment that I want to put him back in a positive light, which is think of all the things that have gone against him this year, and yet he's still gone an 83 and he's been putrid. If that is the worst case scenario and it's what you're going to pay for, oh, man, I'm happy to burn a trade on that in round 1 or 2 next year.
Yeah. And the other thing, you're still in the age bracket as well.
Yeah.
You know, where do you see midfielders typically have their spike year, their biggest year of their career? It's normally around that 26, 27 years old. He's 27 at the start of the next season.
Yeah, wow.
It's right in his wheelhouse. He's still younger than most people think he is because he's been so good for so long.
It's true.
I'm right with you there.
Yeah, no, for me, I want to give him some flowers. Again, he's had a bad year. Some of it was through his own preseason work, but he's had a lot of bad luck with his body this year. So I'm giving him a whole pass, that's for sure. Hey, MiniMonk, it's been a pleasure talking SuperCoach with you. Just one more strategy episode to go for the year. It's weird to think we're almost here, but it's been a big SuperCoach season. Well, thank you, man, for jumping on yet again.
It's been good to jump on. One more, and then we get into the 51 most relevant.
Not yet. No, before we get
full podcast episode on your hair.
Don't you dare start. Don't you dare start. No, we will spend September. Here's what I can tell you we'll do. September, if you're a part of our Patreon at any tier level, so it starts at $2 a month, you can jump right up to the $10 a month, or you're a paid Spotify subscriber. What we will do is we will give you an exclusive audio podcast of my top 10 draftees keeper prospect. So we will look at the people that have just hit AFL clubs this season, and you'll put them in an order of 1 to 10 for you. Let's be honest, number one pick should be very, very obvious of who from the most recent draft. I would say it's a top keeper prospect. That will sit in there. That comes out in September. Throughout October and November, Kane and I are very madly working away on our top 50 keeper prospects. We put it into 8 episodes, 8 tiers, and we work our way through who we believe are the most valuable players to own in a keeper league. We had a meeting the other day. There could be as many as 20 players changing from last year's top 50 into this year's top 50 for keeper ranks. That just tells you how big the swings and roundabouts are in a keeper league, and potentially someone that wasn't even in it last year might end up in one of the top 2 tiers. Who that could be, you might just have to tune in to find that out. And then throughout October, well, over on YouTube, you will get a video from me about every single player that moves clubs via trade or via free agency, giving you my fantasy reviews. That will last through all of October. And then, crazy enough, I know weirdly to say it in December, but December is coming fast for us here at the Coaches Panel, even though it's mid-August. We start talking player position projections, then the reveal of them, the prices, and all of a sudden you're a week out from Christmas and the formats are open. At least in terms of, for super coaches, the team picker's open, let alone what it is. So, and then, yes, the 51 most relevant, we're going to keep it at 50. We're not doing an episode on my hair. Thank you so much for that horrible suggestion. But that will start as well. And so while you might be like, okay, a whole year of fantasy footy is done, don't worry, stick around with the Coaches Panel for us, because our Patreons and Spotify subscribers are about to get a ton of content from us through October, September, and also November, let alone what we start to do publicly through December. So plenty of stuff to come. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, whether it's over on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the audio podcast, make sure you do it. Give a 5-star rating and review. We wish you plenty of luck this week. We hope your players that you bring in, if you've got a trade left, absolutely works out brilliantly for you. I hope your early weekend VC Flanders pops out nice, a big score for you. And if not, you've got Tristan Cherry to save you. Hey, good luck this week from all of us here at the Coaches Panel. We wish you well, and we can't wait to chat with you next week for one last strategy roundtable.